Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I was recently asked by John, hello, what would you suggest as the best force movement options for a wizard, Tier 1 and Tier 2 please? Well John, let's dive deeper. Today I'm going to look at every force movement option that I can find in the game, and let's break down how good, or not so good, they each are. Now, we can mean different things by force movement, like if we teleport a creature with Vortex Warp, or we charm a creature and just ask them to move somewhere. We could knock them prone. Arguably, those can be considered force movement as well, or maybe not. For the purposes of this video, just for the point of keeping it within a reasonable amount of length, I'm going to be restricting this to effects that drag, throw, push, or yank an enemy from their position on the map to a different position. And I'm going to assume we're only talking about forcing an unwilling creature to move, so if an option requires a willing target, I'm not going to cover it today. First, let's quickly go over why we care about moving our enemies at all. Well, obviously, if an enemy is standing on a bridge or near a drop of some kind, force movement, it's pretty obvious. What I find most commonly force movement is used for is a way to throw enemies into spell effects like webs, Everett's Tentacles, Wall of Thorns, Spike Growths, so on. Otherwise, there's other reasons we might want to move an enemy anyway. Maybe they're in our way. Maybe we want to be able to move without taking an opportunity attack, so we push them out of reach. Maybe an Arcane Archer has put a Grasping Arrow on them. I really can't cover every possibility, but what I do find is when force movement is an option, there's often a way to use it to gain some form of advantage. So let's go through the options. This is everything I could find, except the real circumstantial or secondary stuff like, you could cast a Wall of Force in someone's space and they get pushed out of that space. There's that kind of thing, but that's really not what Wall of Force is about. I also didn't worry about stuff that makes flying creatures fall, but I'm sure there's even more I missed. So if there's a force movement option that you use that I didn't think of, let me know in the comments down below. I didn't bother mentioning feats or features that provide class, subclass, or spell options that could potentially be picked for force movement, since I'm going over those class, subclass, and spell options already. So, what do we got? Well, here's some things everyone can do. They can do a shove attack. They can do a grapple attack, and then you drag or carry. But another option is to expend a feat. Then we could take Telekinetic, Charger, Crusher, or Gift of the Gem Dragon. They all provide force movement options. Then there's our racial selection. The new Metallic Dragonborn from Fizbins has a force movement option, as does the Minotaur. Then we have some class features. Now, Warlocks make out like bandits here, because we have Warlock Invocations, Repelling Blast, Warlock Invocations, Grasp of Hadar, and Warlock Invocations, Rebuke of the Talisman. Then we have subclass features, and we have College of Swords, they get Blade Flourish, and they can do a Mobile Flourish. We have Tempest Domain with Thunderbolt Strike. We have Battle Master with Combat Superiority, and they can take Pushing Attack. We have the Psy Warrior, they have Telekinetic Adept, and they can do a Telekinetic Thrust. We have Way of the Open Hand, they can use the Open Hand technique. We have the Swarm Keeper, and they can use their Gathered Swarm. We have Aberrant Mind, and they can use Warping Implosion. And we have Graviturgy Magic, they can use Gravity Well. Then we have a number of spells that include force movement. For cantrips, we have Gust. For first level, we have Thunderous Smite, Thunderwave. For second level, Dust Devil, Gust of Wind, Levitate. For third level, Pulse Wave. For fourth level, Grasping Vine, Watery Sphere. For fifth level, Bigby's Hand and Telekinesis. Sixth level, we have Bones of the Earth and Gravity Fissure. Seventh level, we have Reverse Gravity and Whirlwind. 8th level, we have Tsunami. And 9th level, we have Ravenous Void. And that's everything I could find. So these are all the force movement options I am going to be covering. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grade them for you. But here are the criteria I'm using for that analysis. First, does it use an action, a bonus action, a reaction? Is it part of some other action? Or does it take even longer than a turn to set up? Is there a size limit? Is there a saving throw or other way to resist it? How often is it going to be resisted? Do you need to hit with an attack roll? What kind of direction restrictions do you have? How far does it move them? Does it combine with other useful effects? Like, does it move them and deliver damage, or knock prone? Is it a limited resource, and how limited? Does it require concentration? Can it affect more than one target? And finally, how big an investment is it to get this option? Like, is it a feat, a spell, a high-level spell or feature? Those are a huge investment. And as I was going through the options, even with these criteria, there's just so many variables that these rankings that I'm going to be giving still are just my opinion. So don't take this as an objective ranking or anything. So what I decided is I'm just going to grade it like you get a grade in school. So A, I think, is basically the best options. B, I think, are good options. C, I think, are okay options. D, I wouldn't be investing very much to get that. And F, it's either way too big an investment or it just doesn't do the job properly. All right, so let's go back to the top of our list and get going. So first we have the shove attack, and I am ranking this C. This uses an attack from our attack action, which might be our whole action, moves a creature 5 feet, and we have no choice for direction. We're limited to one size larger than ourselves. There are two big upsides though. The first is this isn't a limited resource, anyone can do it, and everyone at least has a chance to do it. Then we have the grapple attack, then dragging or carrying, and I am ranking this A. I usually wouldn't bother with shove attacks because grappling and dragging is so often better. Same restrictions on size, same attack to use, but we can move creatures more than 5 feet, potentially a lot more than 5 feet. Basically, our movement speed halved. We can also move them in any direction that we can move, and it's unlimited, and it's repeatable. Like, if you're grappled, I can just keep you grappled and then drag you again next time my turn comes around. If you're melee averse, you can have pets or summons, grapple and drag as well. So this one is really, really good. And it's not a crazy investment to be exceptional at grappling and dragging either. Like, if you make a strength-based melee character, you're probably fairly decent at grappling already before looking at any options to make it better. This is a fantastic form of force movement and extremely effective. Alright, so let's get into things we're actually going to have to build to get. We'll start with feats, and the first one we'll talk about is Telekinetic. I'm ranking this B. It's nice that it's a half feat, so we get an ability score boost as well. There's no size limit, and that's terrific. It's a bonus action to use, and we don't need to track number of uses. There is a strength saving throw to resist though, and it's just 5 feet of movement. And here's something I want to highlight, because all the time players take this and then they tell me they're pushing a creature sideways. No, it's just straight towards you or straight away from you. So 2 options, but overall it's good. Then we have the Charger feat, and this is my first ranking of F. Here's why. So it's a feat, so it's a reasonable investment, and we can take the shove action as a bonus action when we use our action to dash, and we can push the shove creature 10 feet. So yeah, it's shoving 10 feet instead of 5, but we have to take the dash action to use this, and we're investing a feat for a really circumstantial option. Most of the time, we could just shove, and then we can spend our feat on something else. Next up is the Crusher feat. I'm ranking this as B. Obviously the feat investment, but like with Telekinetic, it's nice that it's a half feat, so we get a +1 to our ability score. There's a size restriction of one size larger than you, but a couple things I love here. First, there's no restriction on direction at all. And second, if we hit with our attack, there's no saving throw. Only moves the creature 5 feet though. Next feat is Gift of the Gem Dragon. I'm ranking this one as a D. It's the only feat from Fizbin's that's even marginally worth looking at. It's a half feat, so we get that ability score increase, and we get Telekinetic Reprisal. This uses a reaction, requires the target to do damage to you, gives them a strength saving throw, doesn't give you a choice of direction, and it's limited in use to your proficiency bonus per long rest. No size limit though, and it does a bit of damage, so it's not a total fail. Then our racial options. So first we've got the Metallic Dragonborn. I'm ranking this one as a C. So this has some great stuff and some terrible stuff. It can push creatures up to 20 feet and knocks them prone. That's amazing. It's a 15-foot cone, so we can potentially hit multiple creatures. And it replaces an attack. So if we have extra attack, then we still have our other attack available. There's a strength saving throw, and we're not choosing direction, But the main reason I didn't rank this higher is we can do this once per long rest. That's extremely restrictive. And next, the Minotaur, which I ranked B. So I recently featured a build that makes use of hammering horns, and I talk a lot about the feature in that video, but the short of it is, unlimited resource, bonus action to use, pushes 10 feet but no choice of direction, there's a size limitation, and a saving throw. There's better force movement options, but this one I think is still reasonably good. Now we get into class features, and we're going to start with the Warlock Invocation Repelling Blast, and this one gets an easy A. It's one invocation, it will require 2 levels of Warlock, so it's not a massive investment, but 10 feet of movement, this can be applied to every beam of your Eldritch Blast. There's no resource cost. It adds to something we were probably doing anyways. There's no saving throw, no size limit. The only real downsides are we didn't choose a direction, and we need to hit it with our spell attack. Next up is the Warlock Invocation Grasp of Hadar. This one gets a B rank. Again, there's no choice of direction, no size limit, no saving throw. We just need to hit with our spell attack. Now, some might argue whether pushing towards or away is better. I think it depends, honestly. But the big disadvantage of this versus Repelling Blast is we're using this once with our Eldritch Blast. Well, with Repelling Blast, we can apply it to every beam. That's not really an issue before level 5, but then it becomes a bigger and bigger downside as we scale that cantrip with our levels. Then we get the Warlock Invocation, Rebuke of the Talisman. I'm ranking this C, I think. So this is actually a bigger investment than Repelling Blast or Agonizing Blast, as we need the Talisman Pact, which means we need at least 3 levels in Warlock. Some nice things here is there's no saving throw, no size limit, and a reaction to use. But if we're concentrating on force movement, we don't choose when to use this. We need to get attacked. There's no choice for direction, but you know what, it's not limited in uses, so it's still decent. Okay, so let's get into our subclass features. So all of these have a level requirement, which means the higher the level, the bigger the investment. First up, College of Swords, Blade Flourish, specifically the Mobile Flourish. This is gained at level 3, and I am ranking this B. This is a limited resource, and if we use that resource on Mobile Flourish, we're giving up defensive flourishes and actually handing out inspiration. However, there's no action, it's just added onto the attack action we may have been taking anyways. Also, there's no saving throw, no size restriction. It adds damage, and the amount of the move is 5-foot base, but we add our inspiration die, so 10 feet is fairly likely. If we carry this subclass to 14th level, this no longer uses a resource, we can use it every time we take the attack action on our turn. This is good, even though I wouldn't consider it the best Blade Flourish. Next up, the Tempest Domain Thunderbolt Strike. This requires 6 levels in this subclass, and I am ranking it C. The Shock Jock build on my channel is built around this feature, but it's a lot of work to get going. Here's the nice thing. There's no saving throw, and it's added for free when we do lightning damage to a target. So we potentially have multiple targets, maybe even many targets. There's a size restriction, and it's not based on our size. It's just large creatures are smaller, so that's a hefty restriction. But it's the 6 levels in a subclass that gives us remarkably few effective lightning damage options that's the real issue. That's why you need a specialized build to make the most of this. Next up, Battlemaster Combat Superiority Pushing Attack. This requires 3rd level in this subclass. I rank this one D. I don't think it's one of the better maneuvers. If you're desperate for force movement, then at least it's an option, and it's added to an attack you're likely making anyways. And this is 15 feet of movement, which is good, but there's a save, there's a size limit, which again isn't based on your own size, so no workarounds. It's a limited resource. You get 4 superiority dice per short rest. If you keep going Battlemaster, you can eventually get to 6 dice at level 15, and if you think that's good, then I'll just remind you of the previously mentioned Swordsbard Blade Flourish, which you can use unlimited times a level earlier than that, and it doesn't have the size limitation or the saving throw. Next up, Psy Warrior, Telekinetic Adept, specifically the Telekinetic Thrust. I'm ranking this one as a C. So this one is a pretty big investment, 7 levels. Like with the Battlemaster and Pushing Attack, we're using a limited resource. We have some big advantages over Pushing Attack though. In this case, we can push any direction horizontally. By this point in the list, you should realize just how rare that actually is. And there's no size limit here, and we knock it prone on top of it. The C rank is mainly because it's a limited resource, otherwise I would rank it higher. Next up, Way of the Open Hand technique. So this requires 3 levels in this subclass, and I'm ranking it C. We're adding it to something we might already be doing, in this case Flurry of Blows, but Flurry of Blows requires a key point, so this is limited in use. There's also a strength saving throw. 2 nice things though is it is 15 feet of movement, which is pretty good, and there's no size limitation, so your Kobold Monk can potentially push a gargantuan creature 15 feet. Next, the Swarmkeeper Ranger Gathered Swarm. This one requires 3 levels in this subclass, and it gets an A. 15 feet of force movement, and there's no size limit, and we pick the horizontal direction, and we can use it on every one of our turns. We just need to hit the enemy. But it does provide a saving throw, but really if you choose the Swarmkeeper subclass, this is probably the feature that we're going to be most excited about. Then we have the Aberrant Mind, Warping Implosion. This requires 18 levels in this subclass, and that's probably the main reason I would rank this as F. I mean, if we got it earlier, it's actually pretty good. It affects multiple creatures, can move creatures up to 30 feet, does damage. There's a lot to love. It does provide a saving throw though, and we're level 18, so any tougher creatures probably have legendary resistances on top of it. Main thing though, if you want to focus on force movement, you probably shouldn't be looking at features you won't get until 18th level. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered this feature. I just happened across it when going through the force movement options on subclasses. I'm also going to cut in here and just also add that if we are expending like 18 levels focusing on force movement, we actually do have more effective force movement options than this available by that level, and I'm going to be getting into that when we get into spells. Next, we have Graviturgy Magic Gravity Well. This requires 6 levels in this subclass. This ranks A. If you cast a spell at a creature and hit it with a spell attack, or it fails a saving throw, you can move it 5 feet in any direction. So we can potentially move a lot of creatures, and we pick the direction for all of them. This also does friendly movement, by the way. Let's get into our last source of force movement, spell casting. So we're going to start with Gust. This is a cantrip, and it gets an F. So yeah, it's not limited in use, but it uses your whole action. It's limited to medium-sized creatures or smaller, and they get a saving throw, and if they fail, they move 5 feet with no choice of direction. It's just not worth it. Then we have our first level spells. We're going to start with Thunderous Smite. I'm marginally giving this a C rank. It could have been D, it was close. Here's the good stuff. 10 feet of movement, knocks the enemy prone. There's no size limitation, and it does some damage on top of it. Now for the bad stuff. This uses your concentration. You're going to need to use your bonus action to cast this, and then your action to attack. You're going to need to hit. The opponent gets a saving throw. Obviously there's a resource cost as well, and you don't choose the direction. Next up, Thunderwave, and I'm giving this one a C. So every force movement effect we've covered so far that provides a saving throw provides a strength saving throw. Thunderwave is a constitution saving throw, which means Thunderwave is less likely to work on average. Obviously there's a resource cost, this uses your action, but it does do some damage and it can hit multiple creatures. What I tend to find with Thunderwave, and I see Thunderwave used a lot, is as an area of effect damage spell at very low level, it's not bad. But usually there's less use for force movement at those low levels. At higher levels, it's just really unreliable, and the damage stops being all that relevant. Still, it's an okay spell. Then, second level spells, we have Dust Devil. This one is an F. So we're into second level spells now. This is a bigger investment, bigger resource cost. This uses concentration, gives a saving throw, but here's the kicker. A creature needs to end its turn next to the spell effect for this to do anything at all. That's terrible. Big fail. Then we have Gust of Wind. This gets a D. You get a line of effect, and creatures in the line don't move until their turn comes up, and we're concentrating, and we're not choosing direction, and it gets a saving throw. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying Gust of Wind is a bad spell. It clears stinking clouds and fog clouds and cloud kills, and it's decent control if you're, like, in a hallway. But as a force movement option, it's just not a great choice. And this is going to come up again and again. A lot of these spells are going to get a low ranking today because they're not great, specifically if you're focusing on force movement. That doesn't mean they're bad spells. It's just that that aspect of the spell isn't worth investing in it for. But a lot of these spells are good for other reasons. And here's a perfect example. Levitate. So I'm giving this a ranking of D. For force movement, I love Levitate, think it's a great spell. But for force movement, it's not. Uses your action, uses your concentration, it's a single target, provides the dreaded Constitution saving throw, moves the target 20 feet straight up. I honestly didn't even know whether to include Levitate. Straight up is still probably force movement, right? So Levitate is a better spell than the D ranking here, but it's just as a force movement option, we're unlikely to be able to use straight up to push off a cliff. There's fewer spell effects that we're going to have hovering over the enemy, though there's a few, but yeah, there's just less we can do with this, and it covers only one creature, Constitution saving throw, so it's not great for that. Next up, we have Pulse Wave, 3rd level spells now. So this one ranks C. 5 levels of investment and a pretty big resource cost. We also hit that Constitution saving throw again, but we have a 30-foot cone, so we should be able to hit a few targets and deliver some damage, and we're not eating up our concentration. And it's 15 feet of movement, either towards or away from us. So this is okay. And now we're into 4th level spells, and Grasping Vine. And I'm going to marginally give this a D. No, you know what? I'm giving it an F. 4th level spells, they're no joke. Like at least 7 character levels, and it's a big resource cost. We're also using our concentration here. We're affecting a single creature with our bonus action, or maybe one creature, since it gets a dexterity saving throw. It's up to 20 feet of movement, but only towards the spell effect. The thing is, Grasping Vine, it should just be a lower level spell. Then we have Watery Sphere. This one I'm going to give a C. There's a lot more to this spell besides just force movement. It's actually a pretty good spell. But there's 2 ways we can use it for force movement. First, if a creature is restrained in the sphere, we can move the sphere, like up to 30 feet in the direction of our choice. We can restrain multiple creatures, so multiple creatures can be moved this way. Also, if a creature makes its saving throw against the restrain, it's ejected from the sphere, though the creature can choose any options that are equally near to them outside the effect. I recently saw a force movement build that focused on Watery Sphere, and it was definitely interesting. Into 5th level spells. So we're going to start with Bigby's Hand. I'm ranking this a C for force movement, but, well, let's get into it. Okay, so we're into high level spells now. Major investment, major resource cost. Also with Bigby's concentration. We can use our bonus action to use the forceful hand option to push an enemy. It's resisted by an ability check instead of a saving throw, so that's a big advantage, because we're definitely into levels where legendary resistance is a thing, and that doesn't work on ability checks. The distance pushed is based on our spellcasting ability score, so if we have a +3, it's 20 feet, +4 is 25 feet, +5 is 30 feet. We get to choose any direction as well. So this is pretty decent, but again, huge investment, huge resource cost, and concentration. Oh, and it only lasts a minute. Okay, but here's where the ranking could change. By the way I run this spell, if you use Grasping Hand and then you move the effect away from the target, then it would break the grapple because the target is out of reach. But if your DM decides the effect drags the grappled target like it was a creature using its movement, which I understand some DMs do, then this is Crazy Town and it totally gets an A because it's an insane 60 feet of force movement every turn using your bonus action. Next up, Telekinesis, also 5th level. I am also going to rank this a C. To a large degree, this has similarities to Bigby's Hand, and honestly, I probably prefer Bigby's Hand overall as a spell, but for force movement specifically, it's debatable. 30 feet in any direction every round, and in this case, we get a 10-minute duration. Like Bigby's big resource cost, concentration, big investment, resisted by an ability check, not a saving throw, this one uses your action, but not your bonus action, and there is a size limitation of huge size or smaller. And with Telekinesis, I should mention, you likely have a slightly lower chance winning the contested ability check than you did with Bigby's Hand. Now we're into 6th level spells, and we'll talk about Bones of the Earth. Here, I mean, the spell level just has to be a major factor. So I'm going to rank this D for force movement, but again, this is a good spell. It's just the force movement aspect is iffy for the investment. 6th level spell, so we are way into it. The resource cost is huge. We can't even get 6th level spell slots back with a short rest by any means I'm aware of. If a medium or smaller creature is under a pillar raised by bones of earth, he's forced upwards with the pillar, maybe even smacking into the ceiling above. And there's no concentration, but just upwards and medium or smaller creatures. Once again, the D rank here isn't my ranking of this spell overall, just as a forced movement option. Bones of the Earth is actually a great spell. Continuing with 6th level, let's talk about Gravity Fissure. This one I am ranking an F. Again, it is such a huge resource cost. Like, we're probably talking once per long rest until extremely high levels. This gives a Constitution saving throw, and I've had this on a wizard before, and just finding the right positioning of enemies to make anything really significant out of this is like looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm level 18 in that campaign, and I have not had good enough placement to use Gravity Fissure even once. Now we're into 7th level spells, and let's talk about Reverse Gravity. Like with Levitate, I actually was wavering on whether to call levitating enemies forced movement, but that's the way I went. This is almost like a mass levitate spell that sends creatures up 100 feet, except it has a dexterity saving throw. Though there's that neat bit where if they make the saving throw, they still have to hold on to something, not to fall up 100 feet. Oh, and the area here is massive. Really, this is kind of like falling in reverse. And if I'm not going to cover falling, yeah, let's just remove this one. Alright, 7th level, Whirlwind. This ranks C. Now this is force movement. Dexterity saving throw or get caught in the whirlwind. Then you start moving up 5 feet every round, and a creature can use their action to try to break free of the whirlwind, and if they succeed, then they are thrown 3d6 times 10 feet in a random direction. That's more than 100 feet on average, and that's what they get for successfully using their action to try to escape the whirlwind. That's pretty cool, honestly. I mean, obviously, this is an absolutely massive investment, and it uses your concentration as well. And then we have Tsunami. This ranks an F. And how can a spell that force moves creatures 50 feet per round with no saving throw to avoid that part of the spell get an F? Because of mainly the 1 minute casting time. That's how. I mean, if we're looking to make force movement a part of our build, then we're probably looking for something that isn't going to take 10 rounds of combat to cast. I mean, Tsunami, if you can cast it outside of combat, it could be very cool. But it's kind of doing something else than the other features we're talking about here. And then we get Ravenous Void. 9th level spell. So 17 levels of investment and not more than once per long rest. So actually a lower investment than the Aberrant Mind's Warping Explosion for what that's worth. I mean, it is a massive investment, obviously. I am going to rank this C. This honestly is the most dramatic force movement effect in the game. Tremendous area. Potentially over 100 feet of movement to every creature affected by this, and it could be many creatures. And if a creature tries to move away, they'll likely get pulled in again, unless they can teleport or move a huge speed, and they're taking damage. Now I was going to finish up the video with a ranking of my choices of top to bottom, but after spending a bit of time on it, it's just too hard to choose. So in no particular order by grade, here are the force movement options and my subjective ranking of them. So happy force movement, everyone. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.